Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumais. Perek Hey, Halacha Aleph, and yes, starting today, Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Nun Aleph. We left off on Daf Nun Aleph, Amid Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amid by the 2 dots, Tanei. And a few words of introduction is necessary for a loaded Daf that we're going to have today. First of all, we learned many times that if a non-Kohen Bishoygeg a truma, they're obligated to pay back to the kohen not only the value, the keren of the product that they ate, but they have to add a halachic choimish, what we would call 25%, what's called really a fifth. We're going to learn today that the obligation of the keren v'choimish is that it must be paid from chulin. Now, meduma is not allowed to be eaten by a non-kohen. Meduma would mean when truma falls into chulin without the chulin having the ratio of 100 to 1. Even though the kohen, a non-kohen, is not allowed to eat it, what's important to remember is that we do not view the entire meduma as truma. We do not view it that way. Welcome back, Baruch. It's gonna take you a minute to catch up because we're in the middle of something. But we view the mixture as a mixture of truma and chulin. And I would like to just jump ahead and share in these words of introduction a machlekes that we're going to have today in halacha beis. I want to introduce it now to be able to begin learning today's daf properly. One of the topics that the next Mishnah will discuss will be the following case. And I'm giving you the numbers. If a person has 10 saw of truma, aviv, that falls into 90 saw of truma. 10 saw of truma that falls into 90 saw of chulin. You don't have the ratio of 100 to 1. You're kidding? You have over here 10% truma. So therefore we call this mixture meduma. A non-kohen cannot eat it. What were to happen right now if 10 saw from this meduma falls into another 100 saw of chulin? Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says that we view the meduma as truma. So 10 into 100, you don't have the ratio of 100 against 1. Again, meduma. The Chachamim say no. The Chachamim say that the pile number 1, which is meduma, none of it may be eaten by a non-kohen. But it's not pshat that we view it all as truma. No, we don't. We know that 10% of it is truma, 90% of it is chulin. So when 10 from these guys fell into mixture number 2, what percent of this 10 is truma according to the Chachamim? Only 10%. What's 10% of 10? 1. So it's really only 1 of truma that fell into 100. So the second one is not meduma. There's no suffix. It's not about suffix here. Because it's called meduma. There's a status called meduma. We don't call it suffix. Question is meduma considered truma? Is meduma considered a mixture? Now, based on the Chachamim who hold that meduma is only a mixture, we're going to be able to properly understand the Gemara prior to the Mishnah, all predicated on the rule that if, again, a non-kohen eats truma b'shoigig and he has to pay the kohen keren v'choimish, he is only allowed to pay it from chulin, not from truma. Question is, can he pay it from meduma? According to the Chachamim that say that meduma is a mixture of chulin and truma, then he will be allowed to pay it from meduma, as long as you calculate what percent of the meduma is truma and don't put that in the equation. If the chulin part of the meduma is the value of a keren and a choimish, then you will be allowed to pay the kohen from meduma, which is quite awesome. And having said that, we're going to start today the second halacha, which is going to continue to speak about mixtures. The first case, everyone who learned Chizkiah is going to jump out of their chairs, but we're going to leave that for later, not for today. The first case of the Mishnah will be the discussion of what were to happen if truma that's tamei falls into truma that's tahar. Do we say that if there is going to be 100 against 1, so 1 saw of truma that's tamei that fell into one saw of truma that's tamei that fell into 100 truma that's tar, will we say that all of the truma now is allowed to be eaten by a kohen or not? Really?
Did we say the Tuma's never bottled?
Very good,
According
Danny.
to Chizkiah, maybe yesterday?
Whoever learns the Mishnah now will learn Chizkiah should jump out of their chair. Very good, but we're not going to speak about this today. We're going to leave that for the Gemara. We're just going to open up the Mishnah. Don't forget, the Mishnayos don't have Chizkiah in it. It's kind of awesome that the Gemara didn't bring this Mishnah to contradict Chizkiah, even though the case is not exactly the same, but we'll leave that for later. We're going to learn in the Mishnah, like I just mentioned, Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, how to view Meduma. And we're going to learn in this Mishnah, just giving one other word of introduction before we dive inside, because it's a loaded daf. Listen to this case. You have one saw of Truma that fell into 100 chulin. What's the din? What did we say? It's nullified, right? We're good. But a non-kohen cannot just eat it. You have to remove one and give it to the kohen. Okay, he removed one and gave it to the kohen. Now, another saw of Truma fell into this 100. Do we say at a certain point that you can't eat it anymore? Or, since one Truma fell into halachic 100 chulin, bottle, and you removed one and you gave it to the kohen, now it's 100 chulin. And if it happens a billion times, a non-kohen will always be allowed to eat it. Our Mishnah says that if you have 51 saw of Truma that fell in total, in other words, if what fell into this mixture is more than half of the total, right, there's 100, even though the first one was nullified, and you removed one and you gave it to a kohen, we're going to say now everything reawakens. And now that you have the majority of Truma, you won't be allowed to eat it. These are a few of today's cases. Every case.
Did we learn yesterday from Rabbi Eliezer that the one you took out, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the one that you take out is the actual one?
Very good. Actually, this is predicated on the opposite logic, that the one that you took out might have been 100% chulin. And since it might have been all chulin, now that the 51st fell in, now you have roiv truma. Don't forget that biblically, nullification happens in majority. The ratio of 100 to 1 is only a rabbinic law. But the rabbinic law cannot trump the biblical law. Very good. Okay. Chevra, daf nun aleph, and nun aleph amud aleph, again by the two dots, 4 lines from the top at the end, the last word, Tani, we learned the following in the Brais. Saw truma, saw baruch is a quantity of truma. Just quickly, we're learning about truma, which is only allowed to be eaten by a kohen. If it falls into chulin, chulin means non-truma produce. We're talking about produce that look alike, flour in flour, grain in grain. Rabbinically, you have to have a ratio of 100 against 1 for the truma to be nullified. Even when you have the ratio, you have to remove one and give it to the kohen. If you don't have the ratio of 100 to 1, even if you have 99, one saw is a measurement, 1 pound of truma that fell into 99 pounds of chulin, the mixture is called meduma. Meduma means mixture, and a non-kohen is not allowed to eat it. Okay, so saw truma, shenafla lapachos mimeya, one saw of truma fell into less than 100 of chulin. And now we know the rule is Harei Elu Miduma, in this mixture of now 100. 99 chulin, one of Truma, is called Miduma, which means it may not be eaten by a non-kohen. And the question is, how do we view Miduma? Option A, all of the Miduma is like Truma. Or no, Miduma is a mixture of chulin and Truma. Lamay nafkemina, here's the difference. Rule number 1. Ve'ein mishalmen mehen keren v'choimish al mokim acher. If someone, like we mentioned in our words of introduction, if a person ate, let me give you numbers just to make this clear, okay? Aviv, halt cup over here. If a person ate 4/5 of a saw of truma, when you add the chaimish, you have to give back now 1 saw to the kohen. If I had 4/5 of truma, if I ate it, Mia Yisrael, Bishoigeg, the punishment is I have to not only compensate what I ate, which is 4/5, but I have to add a chaimish, which would means now I owe a saw to a kohen. The rule is that this payment must come from chulin. Question is, can I pay the kohen from my meduma? And basically what the Braisa is saying, that we do not say you categorically cannot. You don't say that. What you do say is, make the cheshbon, like we gave over here. Here we gave a number that from 100, 1% is truma. So if I want to pay a kohen from this mixture, how much do I have to give to a kohen? 1.1 sa. Why 1.1 sa? Because the percent in it that's truma, that is what I cannot use to pay my keren v'chaimish. But I am allowed to say that since at the end of the day, 99% of this mixture is chulin, from the 99, I'm paying back the saw. The saw that I owe is fully covered by the 99. How do I do that? By give 1.1. Gavaldik, right? Let's read it inside again. You can't pay from it, all of it, for me eating truma. I ate not from a duma. I ate 4/5 of a saw of a kohen, nor in the other direction. V'loy mimakem acher aleihen. V'loy mimakem acher aleihem. So if a kohen, the opposite direction, guys. If a non-kohen ate meduma, same question. But if I ate meduma, I have to pay keren v'chaimish. We don't say, well, if I ate 4/5 of a saw of meduma, I got to give a kohen 1 saw of chulin. No, I don't, because in the case that we gave, that 1% of the mixture was truma. So if I ate 4/5 of a saw of meduma, what do I owe to a kohen? Keren v'chaimish of only 1% of what I ate. In other words, both of Ela Lefi Cheshbon, both of the laws of this Braisa is predicated, as we spoke out in our introduction, on a rule that we will have in a couple of lines in the Mishnah, where the case in the Mishnah is, let me just repeat it again. You had 10 saw of Truma Vlad that fell into 90 saw of Chulin. I'm giving a scenario where you have a meduma mixture, there's no nullification, it's not 100 to 1. It's 10% is truma, but 10% is truma. Now, from this meduma mixture, 10 saw fell into another pile of 100 chulin. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says the second pile is meduma because 10 is not nullified in 100. 1 is nullified in 100. The Chachamim say no, that the 10 of meduma is not 10 truma, only 10% of it is truma, which means really it's only 1 saw. 1 saw of truma that falls into 100 of chulin becomes nullified. So based on the Chachamim that we'll have in the Mishnah, says this Braisa that we now apply that in these two scenarios, where either a non-kohen ate truma and he has to pay and he wants to pay from meduma, or if a non-kohen ate meduma and now he has to compensate keren v'chaimish, in both scenarios, he only does it lefi cheshbon, according to the proportion of how much truma was mixed in the meduma. That's really awesome.
That's your question on that, Rabbi?
Yes.
It sounds like what you're saying is that everything has the mixture fully inundated in every bit of it. But like, does that apply to an apple? Like, let's say you have an apple that's a single item. Am I going to say that 90% of this apple is fine, but 10% of it is truma? Or
you're getting ahead of yourself, because what you're saying, Danny, is what the Gemara is going to say up until the Mishnah. What we are saying, what we are saying is that we have flour and flour. That all of these laws are based on the presumption that when I mix truma flour with chulin flour, that I mixed it good enough.
It gets evenly distributed.
Where it's evenly distributed. But like the Gaba is saying, if you're going to actually break it down, one granule is either this or that. If I have apples and apples, one apple is not going to be 90% this or 10% that, which means that when solids mix, they do not mix the way liquids mix. Liquids actually halachically fully mix, in which whatever part of the liquid you remove, you can argue that it's part and part. Now, what difference does it make? Huge. Now, we're going to learn that the next few lines until the Mishnah is the Gemara qualifying the opinion of the Chachamim. That said, like we just quoted, that will say, we're going to learn in a couple of lines, that Meduma is not viewed as Truma. Meduma is viewed as proportion, a mixture. And what's the mixture? Well, you have to know what the proportion was. 10%, 5%. Whenever you did not have the ratio of 100 to 1. The moment you have the ratio of 100 to 1, then it's halachically nullified. But when there's no nullification, it doesn't become truma. It becomes a mixture. However, says the Gemara, all of the above is only ubedavar she'ein darkoi lihibalel. That's only regarding items that don't fully blend, meaning solids, whether they are apples or even whether they are kernels of grain, or even if they are little specks of flour. But that speck is a self-contained item that doesn't blend into its neighboring speck. As wine, as oil. Now we're saying a fantastic rule. This rule is regarding the second mixture. This rule is not regarding the first mixture. Regarding the first mixture of it, if I have oil, truma, oil chulin, the rule will be the same. That only if I have 100 liters of chulin against 1 liter of truma, will the truma be nullified. And if I don't have that ratio, then the mixture may not be consumed by a kohen, period. We are discussing the case that we quoted from the Mishnah in a few lines. What happens if from this meduma something was removed and it got put into another pile of chulin? Another cup of chulin. So the Chachamim were the ones that say that you view the meduma that fell into pile number 2 as how much of it was truma, and all you need to focus is on the truma shabai. That's only, says the Gemara now, if solids got mixed with solids, but if liquids with liquids and they fully blend, then hoilchem achar horoiv. Wow. Then the law of concerning the second mixture will change, not the first mixture. What does it mean the law will change? How will it change to? We say the following. Im roif truma, we're speaking about mixture number 1. If in mixture number 1, the majority was truma, so let's use numbers over here. So I had 2 liters of truma, and it fell into 1.5 liters of chulin, or any other number, then we say, even the Chachamim will consider the entire meduma as truma, all of it. And if this falls into mixture number 2, the chulin of number 2 has to have 100 against all of what fell in. On the other hand, if in mixture number 1, there was a majority of chulin, a simple majority. So 1 cup of truma fell into 2 cups of chulin. Forget about the 100 to 1. It's just 2 against 1. But you had the majority of chulin. As far as the second mixture is concerned, listen to these words, my friends. As far as the second mixture is concerned, we view all of meduma as chulin. Which means that if any of this fell into another cup of chulin, none of that will ever become meduma. None of that will ever become meduma. Meduma from mixture number 1 will never be allowed to be consumed if you did not have the ratio of 100 to 1. Make no mistake. But as far as how do we view the meduma, if it gets mixed into another pile, the Gemara is machadish, and so paskins the Rambam, that we differentiate the law between solids and liquids. quite amazing.
So can you clarify something for me, Rabbi?
Yes.
Okay, if you have an initial mixture that's, let's say, 49 to 51, 49% truma, and you eat some of that, you're now responsible to pay, I'm talking liquid, right? If it's a 49% truma liquid, you have to now pay the 49% whatever plus a chaimesh to the kayan. But if that mixture falls into a second mixture, you don't have to pay anything.
I didn't say you don't have to pay.
Did I get that right?
You got to, if that mixture, one thing was saying, I want to tell you, you're saying very important. What you're saying, the Pnei Moshe says over here, to make it clear that even though we're saying that imroiv truma truma, imroiv chulin chulin, this has nothing to do with the first law that we learned today. The first brisa that we learned about today, which is about paying the keren v'chaimish, even by liquids. If I'm not a kohen, if I consumed whatever quantity of the first mixture, liquids, how much keren v'chaimish do I have to pay? The proportion of truma shabai. Very good, Danny. No, it's the laws of payment, of penalty. We don't differentiate solids and liquids. This statement of the Gemara is only regarding if meduma fell into the next pile. Mixture A, mixture B. That's it. And regarding that, we say that if mixture A was roit chulin, listen to these words. Mixture B will never become a duma. Even though if I ate mixture A, I'm chayv to pay keren v'chaimish, proportionally.
No, but that's exactly my point. So you take that, whatever it is, a chunk of that first mixture, pour it into a second mixture, as long as it's not majority, it's minority of that second mixture.
Say majority
and now you consume that. You could consume as much of that as you want. You could eat the whole thing, and you don't have to pay anything to the kayan.
Not eat, drink.
Drink.
Yes.
Okay, drink.
These are big halachas. If we would be in yeshiva, we would spend the whole day on this. And what's the logic behind it? But we were not sitting in yeshiva now. We're sitting over here, balabatim, working. We gotta move on. Daf nun aleph. Yes.
For the liquid, it's easier to become swollen.
Well, easier to become truma also.
Yeah.
But no, it goes both ways. We're saying that since biblically we follow the majority, when things really, really, really mix, then we have to follow the law of the majority all the way to the end. It's whatever the majority is. That becomes, the majority affects everything. Let me give you an example of majority. That when you have a basin that's giving a ruling, and let's say you have a basin of 23 or a basin of 71. So we follow the majority. So the way we spoke about this, what really has to happen over there is that once they take the count and they know that the majority are ruling that this person is going to be guilty or the person will be innocent, what really needs to happen is that the minority opinions, they have to readjust their thinking. They have to become open to allowing themselves to identify with the logic of the majority. For you ultimately to have a ruling of all of the Beis Din. So the Beis Din is ruling chayev, or the Beis Din is ruling pater. In other words, there are times that the rule of the majority doesn't just mean, well, we have to get along and not everyone agrees, so we'll just follow the majority. At certain times, we say that the minority adopts the majority's opinion. But we only say that by liquids. We don't say that by solids. In other words, there are times that we want to have consenting views. That's the beauty. We're going to follow the majority, but there is a minority. In other words, does the minority retain its identity? That's the question. If they fully blend, then they don't. Should a marriage be solid or liquid? That's the question. What do you think, Aviv? You might think that it sounds nice if it's a liquid. It doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes it's good. Everyone has their opinion. There's a system that whenever there's a disagreement, so, we'll take turns. Today, me, tomorrow, you. You see, I put me before you. We always do that. And sometimes you have to come to the same place. Solids or liquids. Okay, Chevra, we got to move. The majority of today's daf will be the Mishnah, halacha beis. This Mishnah is awesome. Mamish. Every case is a bomb. The biggest problem with the first case is that we happened to learn 2 daf of Gemara that spoke about Chizkiah, and the way we explained it, the whole beauty, min b'minoi, the majority, Rab Chizda, whatever we learned right now is going to be a problem with the Mishnah. We all know that. We're not going to address it right now because we don't have time. But we're going to begin with the laws of the Mishnah. Up until now, we spoke about mixtures of Truma and Chulin. Now we're speaking about Truma and Truma. So what's the issue? The issue is that some of it is Tamei. Question will be, do we say that if you have 100 Truma Tahira, will that nullify the one in the 100 of Truma Tameya, allowing a kohen to eat all of it up? That's the question. Says the Mishnah. Sa Truma Tameya. Shenafla Lameya sa Truma Tahira. Machlekes Beishamai and Beisilum. Almost sounding like Chizkiah is following Beishamai. Beishamai Oisrim. No, there's no nullification when it comes to Tuma. But Beisilel are Matil. Yes, it's not obviously. I want to make something very clear. We have to just keep on reviewing these laws. If, let's say, flour got mixed, if the tahar flour has become wet with any one of the 7 liquids, making those flours susceptible to becoming tamei, if that would have been the case, then what we are learning right now doesn't work. We're not talking about a case where something tamei that has contact with something tahar, we're not expecting for the laws of imparting tuma not to function. If the tahar is susceptible to becoming tamei, of course it becomes tamei. And then you don't have the right ratio. We're speaking like we have been speaking until now, that you had flour whose grain, from when you cut it off the field, it never got wet or did not get halachically wet. There was no ritzoin ba'alim, etc. Or the water that made it wet was never uprooted, or all of the halachas that you have to know. So right now, there's no imparting of Tumah. You have 1 in 100. Says Beis Hillel that since we see that when it comes to Truma and Chulin, Chulin has the potency of nullifying the Truma, so then Tahara has the potency of nullifying the Tumah. Amru Beis Hillel le Beis Shammai. How can you say that it's not nullified? Hoyel utahoira asura lezarim. Truma tahoira cannot be eaten by non-kohanim. Tameya is asur to kohanim. In other words, both are prohibited to different groups of people. But, you have an item that's prohibited to a group of people. So why don't we say, ma tahoira oila, just like truma, that's tar, is nullified. Yeah, you got to have the proportion of 100 chulin. Okay, but it could at some point become nullified. So after meyatala, why wouldn't tuma that's prohibited to another group, to kohanim, why would it not become nullified with the ratio of 100 to 1?
Would you have to pull one out?
We're going to get to that in a moment. Amru lahem beishamai loy. Danny, absolutely. But let's leave that for later. Amru lahem beishamai. No. Can't compare one case to the other. Look at his logic. Im he'elu hachulin hakalin hamutarim l'zarim es hatohiram. Let me use these words. Chulin is fully permitted. What does it mean fully permitted? Chulin is permitted to even non-kohanim. So the koyach of permit, the koyach of heter in chulin is a lot stronger than the koyach of heter in truma tohira, right? Because truma tohira, Aviv, it could be eaten by a kohen, but it's not permitted food. A non-kohen cannot eat it. That's their logic. So something that its koyach dehetera is more potent and nullifies cannot be used as a source to teach you that something else, truma tohira, that's not as potent with its koyach dehetera, because truma has already restrictions, right? Tala truma hachamura. Chamura means it's not as permitted as chulin. No. Something that doesn't have a koyach tehetera as much as chulin cannot be like chulin, and it cannot nullify the truma temeya. Now that the Mishnah records one back and forth between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the Mishnah is taking it as a given that we somehow know that one party conceded to another party. The Mishnah does not even attempt to tell you who conceded to who, but it will become obvious, and that will be the first piece of the Gemara. Maybe we'll have time to learn that today. After they conceded, really, guys, Beis Shammai conceded to Beis Hillel, but we don't know that yet. So now, what Danny asked, no, it's now that we have a bittul, you have one truma tameya. It fell into 100 truma tahira. What did we learn until now? Truma in chulin, even when you have the ratio, even when it's nullified, the non-kohen cannot eat all up to 101. You got to remove one, and you got to give it to a kohen. Over here, it's different. Why is it different? Because here, whatever is here is only good for a kohen. The whole thing is truma. If you have to remove one, that would mean that the one that you're removing should have the status of tuma. Do we say that? Machloikis. And this is aligned with what we had in Halacha Aleph. Rabbi Eliezer says, yes, you have to remove one and you have to burn it. And let me just remind us of the words that Rabbi Eliezer said in Halacha Aleph. Rabbi Eliezer, Sha'ani Oimer, saw Shenafla. He saw also. The one that fell in is the one that you are removing. Well, if the one that you are removing is the one that fell in, the one that fell in was Tameh, the one that you are removing, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is Tameh. Truma, Tameh has to be burnt. The Chachamim say that since you have the ratio of 100 to 1, we say a new din over here. Of the bimiyuta, look inside the marafulda, 3 lines before the bottom of the amid of the bimiyuta, kiven the hakoil truma. It's when truma falls into chulin, even though it was nullified, but you began with 2 things that were unlike. Since everything is truma, like, even though we learned yesterday that you can argue min b'mina should never be nullified. Here we're going in the opposite direction. Since everything is truma, you don't have to remove anything. We're going to leave more for the Gemara. We're learning mamish the foundations of the laws of bittul now. Next case. Okay. So here, satruma, going back to the original laws of mixture. You have one of truma that fell into 100 of chulin. We're not going truma. And what we know is you got to remove one. You removed one. We're calling this the replacement saw. And instead of you just giving it to a kohen and shalom al Yisrael, this shlamazel took this one, and this one fell into another mixture. We quoted this case in the beginning of today's daf. Now, notice how the Mishnah is not stam saying that some of the meduma fell into another place. The Mishnah is telling you that you picked up a replacement saw. According to Rabbi Eliezer, what's this replacement saw? The one that fell in is the one that you took out. If the one that you fell in was truma, all of it is truma. So if this fell into another mixture, how much do you need in mixture number 2 to nullify this? 100 against 100. Very good. Rabbi Eliezer, it's all the shitasai that midamas ketrumas vadai. Again, sha'ani yoimer, saw shenafla, he saw sha'alsa. It all fits. The one that you removed is treated as fully truma. So the second batch needs, again, 100 chulin to nullify it. We finally turned the page. And that was the beginning of today's daf, that we don't look at meduma that way. Chiddush is, even on the one that you removed as a replacement, Eina medamas ela lefi cheshben. That's mamish gavaldik. In other words, the replacement saw is not considered to be entirely truma. Whatever the proportion was, In mixture number 1, like I gave an example today, in mixture number 1, it was 10 truma, 90 chulin, which means you have 10% truma. Okay, if you have 10% truma, the Chachamim will argue that even if 10 of them fell into 100, it's going to be nullified. Because when 10 falls into mixture number 2, it's not 10 into 100, it's only 1 in 100. Because only 10% of the first mixture is truma. Don't forget what we learned in the Gemara before the Mishnah, which is extremely important. This is only by solids. By liquids, it's a whole different rule. Lachacham. Next.
So in that example, Rabbi Eliezer would hold that you have to take 10 of them out?
Well, the example would be if you had 10 that fell into 1,000, Danny.
No, but I'm saying the example that you just gave of the Chachamim, right, where it was 10%, and then 10 of them fell into another 100. You say you have to only take out 1, right?
Yep.
But in that same example, according to Rabbi Eliezer, would you say you'd have to take out 10?
Never. No, of course not.
Oh no, it's not bottled. You just have
no. The chiddush of the Mishnah is that this din is not only if mixture number 1 somehow part went into mixture number 2. The Mishnah is saying even if you removed your replacement saw, the replacement saw should be l'chu'ura considered truma more than any other part of it. Even that, the Chachamim say, is not considered truma. It's considered a mixture. Next case. Saw truma shenafla lepachus mimeya. Again, we're not talking about tumantara. We're talking about soft truma that fell into aviv less than 100 chulin, which means not bottle. What does it mean? Meduma. All right? Now, same thing. This actually is the case that we gave before, Danny. This is the case that we gave before. And now this meduma fell into another pile. Rabbi Eliezer says, Midamas ketrumas vadai. The entire batch, all of the first pile, all of it is considered truma. It's amazing. So you need to have a ratio of 100 to 1. That we look at the ratio, it's whether there was bittul, whether there was not bittul. Whether we're looking at the one saw that you removed, whether we're looking at the whole dimua. Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim stay consistent, each one with their opinion. Rabbi Eliezer learns the one that you remove is truma. Rabbi Eliezer learns that if you'd never had the bittul, if everything is meduma, everything is truma vadai, rabbinically, of course. But it has, all of it has the status of truma vadai. And the Chachamim say no. If you don't have the nullification, it's a proportional problem. It's not all of it is a truma problem. If you have the nullification and the Chachamim said you have to remove one, we don't consider that one, we do not consider that one to be, even rabbinically, all truma. We do consider the proportion of that one. What's the proportion of that one? 1 in 101. Not 1%, less than 1% is considered truma. Now that has to be nullified in mixture number 2, but not more than that. Next case in the Mishnah. And before the Mishnah moves on, the Chachamim are going to show you 2 other halachas that are not related to truma, in which we use the concept of cheshbon. Rule number 1 is when it comes to chametz. Now, let me speak the following. We're not speaking about Pesach. We're speaking about the dinim of Truma. And there is, even though the rule is that if you have the ratio of 100 to 1, there is nullification. Aviv, listen, it's very simple rules. If the minority is essential to the food, as an example, when you bake bread, first of all, when you bake bread, you do not need sourdough. Because when you mix flour and water and you just leave it standing, at some point, it's going to rise. But you have to have the right amount of time for that. If I am in a rush to bake bread and I need for the dough to reach a certain amount of leavening, that will be the word in English, before I put it into the oven, one of the things that I could do to speed it up is putting in the dough sourdough. Okay? Now, what were to happen if I have chulin dough, but I leavened it with truma sourdough? So first of all, I want you to know that
is that called a David HaMaimed or
David HaMaimed? Very good.
Yeah.
David HaMachametz. Starter. It's a starter. But Maimed is a starter. I would call this maybe not a starter. David HaMachametz. Maybe that's the word in halach. So first of all,
this is like Sa'ir, right?
What was that?
Is that called Sa'ir?
That's that.
In the Torah?
Sa'ir is a sourdough. COVID brought back Sa'ir into the world. So now like this. Let me just give you a mashal, okay, Aviv? Let's say that if I have 50 pounds of dough, 1 cup, I'm just giving you a mashal, 1 cup of sourdough is going to bring the 50 pounds plus the cup in to where I want it to be. Leavened enough for me to bake it. 1 cup is needed for 50. Okay? Even if 50 pounds is many hundreds of times more, doesn't matter. Everything is called meduma. You with me so far? So now, let's say I have 100 pounds of dough. I put into it 2 cups of sourdough. All of this is meduma. What happens if some of this was put into another mixture, another dough to leaven that? Same thing. 2 ways of understanding the first meduma. According to Rabbi Eliezer, right, what would he argue? That no matter if I take out only 1 cup of the first 100 pounds and 2 cups, only 1 cup, well, let's say if 1 cup is needed for 50 pounds, if it fell into 50 pounds or less, all of that is truma. But that's not the halacha. You know what the halacha is? Lefi cheshbon. What would the cheshbon mean? If 1 cup is needed to leaven 50 pounds, mixture number 2 was, dough number 2 was 50 pounds. How much of the first has to fall into the second to make the second truma? 50 pounds. Because I put 2 cups into 100 pounds, which means 1 cup is in every 50 pounds. That's the meaning of the words, that ve'ein ha'mechumetz. Mechumetz is something that is miduma, even though it's more than 100 to 1. Dough number 1 is mechumetz. Dough number 1 is 100 pounds, and there was only 2 cups of sourdough of truma. All of it is considered meduma. But if some of the mechumetz fell into another dough, that is just backing up the shita of the chachamim, that we don't say all of the meduma is a problem. The meduma is a problem proportional to what the real problem is. We always look at its proportion. Another rule, backing up the shita of the chachamim, the laws of a mikvah. Now, there are 2 very different ways of reading the next line of the Mishnah, and let's go, we'll learn both of them. You have to have 40 saw of rainwater that were gathered directly from the rain into, halachically directly from the rain, into the mikvah for it to be kosher. Once you have 40 saw of rainwater, then you can add as much drawn water as you want. If you don't have 40 saw, the rule is if you added 3 loig of drawn water, you invalidated the whole thing. Now, one way of understanding, and I want to tell you this is going to be fascinating regarding our mikveh, any mikveh. There is something called hamshacha. Hamshacha means that if you have drawn water, mayim she'uven, but instead of you pouring it into the mikveh, you pour it on the ground, and it flows on the ground for 3 tfachim or more. That's called hamshacha. Some are of the opinion that the fact that the gathered water flowed on the ground for the 3 tefach, it undid the she'uvim problem. Now, there are some opinions that take it to the extreme, and they actually argue that will be the easiest way to fill up a mikveh. And I want you to know that every single mikveh that's built, aside of the Boyd Zeriyan, the Boyd Hashaka, and the Boyd Al Gabeda, the bottom Boyd, all of the water also does hamshacha, all of it. But most opinions don't hold that hamshacha completely undoes Mayim She'uvim. What they do say is the following, that if you have a mikvah that had 20 sa'ah of rainwater or less, into which fell 3 loig of mayim she'uvim, even if they had amshacha, it's still going to invalidate. But if you had the majority of the 40 sa, 21 sa, really it doesn't mean 21, it means 20 and a little bit sa of mayim, of rainwaters, and now you had the 3 loig did do hamshacha, it's not going to disqualify it. That's one way of understanding the cheshbon. And then there's a complete different way of understanding it. And that is, when do we say that 3 loig of drawn water invalidate a mikvah if it doesn't yet have the 40 sa? If the 3 loig fell into the mikvah either in 3 kalim or less. Avada, if it all came from 1 utensil, even if it came from 2, even if it came from 3, as long as each one had a loig, not 3 that one had less than a loig and one had more than a loig. But if the 3 loig that fell into the less than 40 sa of mayim, of rainwaters, if it fell in more than 3 utensils, in other words, you did not have loig utensils, that's the cheshbon, it will not invalidate the mikvah. All showing that even when you have a problem, you still make a cheshboinus. And not, now that there's a problem, it's never good, the way Rabbi Eliezer says. These are the 2 other areas in halacha that the chachamim bring to back up their opinion. And now we're coming back to our dinim of dimua, another case. And that is, we mentioned this in our words of introduction. So truma shenafla lemeya, one soft truma that fell into 100 of chulin. So now you have the nullification. And now, not only that, but that's very important. Higbia, you removed the replacement saw. That means you fully resolved it. How much saw do you have left, Aviv? No, you don't. Now you have 100 because you had 100 chulin. Now 1 truma, you had 101. You removed 1. Now you removed 1. Now you're back to 100. What happens if another saw of truma fell into this 100? The nafla acheres, and again he biyam, and whether you gave it to a coin or not, it doesn't matter. But you removed 1. You're back to 100. Halachically, it's chulin, and now the nafla acheres, and that kept on happening. Says our Mishnah that it's not forever going to be okay. It's only going to be okay in the case that I'm giving prior to the 51st time that this happened. Once it happened for 51 times, which means Vadai 51 saw of Truma is in here. Why am I saying Vadai? Well, let me take that back. There's a possibility that when you remove the 1 saw, the opposite of Rabbi Eliezer, you remove the 1 saw, it only came from chulin, because the majority was chulin. So if you only remove the chulin, now you're going to have more truma than chulin in a simple majority. Once you have more truma than chulin, then it's not going to be okay. So harezi muteres chetira b'truma l'chulin. Wow. Everything will be discussed.
And Rabbi Eliezer would be Mako in this case, because he would say every time you pulled it out, you were actually pulling out the
Danny,
truma.
I don't know yet. I would think so, but I don't know yet. Because sometimes opinions say what they say, l'chumra, but now you are asking whether he's going to go all the way, even l'kula. I don't know. But there is such a logic, because Ani Oimer, he saw Shanafla, he saw Sha'alsa. So what you removed was the truma. So it can happen 1 billion times. But this is for sure. Okay.
Right. But why doesn't it?
I think in general, these 2 opinions are not always l'chumra versus.
We'll see.
Sometimes you come up with scenarios where the chachamim end up being more machmir.
Next, Vlad, you want to say something quickly?
Yeah, just quick. Why don't we count that some of it's been mixed? I mean, it's natural that there's a mixture.
In other words,
some truma remains.
Very good. So what we're actually, no. You're asking a question that since when you removed, let's go with the chachamim proportion.
Right.
The din achatirba truma l'chulin means the way the Mishnah means when the 51st time that this happened, it's not good. Why? It's only a problem if you're going to say, Vlad, so chamur that every time you remove, you only remove chulin. So Vlad is asking, why would you say that? We're saying that l'chumra. L'chumra, we can say that. Let's go weiter. But you have a good point. It's a big chumra, this. Now, a similar case. Saw truma that fell into 100 of chulin, but before you removing the one, we don't say, since it's nullified. We don't say that. The Chacham, the Tanakama says, now that the Chachamim said you have to remove one to give it to a kohen, prior to you removing that one, if number 2 fell in, it's as if they both fell in together. And when 2 fall into 100, do you have the ratio of bittul? Absolutely not. Harezu asura. Rab Shimon is going to say that it's mutter. Rab Shimon says, yeah, you have to remove one and give it to a kohen. We know that. But if one truma fell into 100 of chulin, it's nullified. Now that it's nullified, when the second one falls in, like we learned before, let's go with the Mishnah before, you know when you're going to have a problem if 51 falls in. Bezach total. But when number 2 fell in, it was nullified. Again, nullified. Now, even according to Rab Shimon, how many do you have to remove now to give to a kohen? 2. 100%. The point is that you can remove 2 and you can eat the rest. And just, I know it's 701, I just want to begin. When the Mishnah says that Veshama and Besilil, when they admitted to each other, just the Gemara wants this word out. Rabbi Yudan, Bar Pazi, Rabbi Aibu, Bar Nagri, Rabbi Yosef, Amrin, when they were speaking, learning the Mishnah together, in our Mishnah it says, Achar Shohaidu, so who was Maida to who? Whether Tumas Batal in Tara, Beishamai le Besilil, or Besilil le Beishamai, and Amrim, they said, Neitzei lachutz v'nilmad, let's go outside the Beis HaMedrash, which means that let's consult our other colleagues. When you don't have enough chevra in the Beis HaMedrash, you have